Morning seminar was billed as a 2-for-1 seminar. We have two speakers who are going to talk to us about, as you might have gathered so far, two aspects of soil health. Pat Sauer is going to be presenting on a recent research project that looked at urban soil quality restoration following urban development. She's also going to talk about the soil management and soil quality restoration section in the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual and current practices that cities and counties have adopted to improve local urban soil health. And Tom Sauer is going to talk about the new Forestland in-field soil health assessment tool developed to observe and assess soil health under tree cover. This tool is designed for application to private non-industrial forest lands and identifies soil aggregate instability, compaction, soil organic matter depletion, or soil organism habitat loss. So great. Thanks for being here this morning. And it is great to have you with our seminar group.
Well, thank you very much.
I did just want to jump in and let everyone
Okay.
know that this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. So here's a sound check, and then just to double check that you're seeing my starting. You're seeing the full screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Sauer, and I just recently stepped down from a nonprofit that I helped found in Iowa called the Iowa Stormwater Education Partnership. I'm now a strategic planner working part-time for them, just kind of easing the transition for the new executive director. So, but we're going to talk about urban soil quality restoration. And we had a campaign a couple of years back called Healthy Soils, Healthy Streams, making that connection between, if you have healthy soils, you're going to have healthy streams. A little bit about the Iowa Stormwater Education Partnership, ISWEP, nonprofit. We essentially are the equivalent of three groups in Minnesota, but we support Iowa's regulated MS4 cities. We develop educational resources, technical resources, do technology transfer, track regulatory updates, etc. And then we also do training on all things stormwater, construction site erosion and sediment control to watershed aspect, urban watershed management. And the P word is incredibly important. Partnership is really important for us. I mean, that is how we get things done. So we're going to look at these different topics, healthy versus unhealthy soils, research, how soil quality restoration is done, and a little look at Iowa cost share programs. So first off, there's a lot of attention given to when we talk about ecosystems. What's the first thing that you think of? It's everything above ground, right? We don't think about this whole dynamic ecosystem that occurs beneath the vegetative surface. So a living, breathing, very dynamic system that we essentially rely on to support us, to support wildlife and all living organisms. So it's a very complicated system as well. There are soil scientists that look at the physical, chemical, biological processes in soils. So very dynamic system. And when we look at soil, there's the natural part of soil, untouched part of soil, but in urban landscapes, soil is often thought of as dirt. We're moving it around, we're using it as foundations of building. I don't think that excavator operator is thinking at all about what's being disturbed or such. So it's thought of as dirt. And we just mentioned this little soils humor is kind of a little dry, but for a soil scientist, dirt is a 4-letter word. I'm going to give you a little 101 of soils, just because I'm not sure of everyone's background, and then some of the terms I'll throw out, you'll have a baseline for what that is. So what is soil? Complex mixture of mineral materials, particles, organic matter, air, water, microorganisms, and it's formed by all of these, by climate, vegetation and organisms, its position in the landscape. And just to build an appreciation, it takes hundreds to thousands of years to form 1 inch of soil. And yet, I always say, we're sending due to soil erosion, we're sending semi-loads full of topsoil down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico every year. And I'm hoping this doesn't happen in my lifetime, that we don't form this 51st state in the Gulf of Mexico. What is the function of soil? Nutrient cycling, water infiltration, filtration, stability for plant and animal life. And if you're looking at an undisturbed soil profile, typically you would see different layers, different colors. You would see a surface layer that's very dark and high in organic matter. That is, we would call the A horizon. There is a O horizon, but in agricultural areas that was eroded a long time ago, but typically an A horizon. And then as you go through the soil profile, you'll see the soil gets a little lighter, and there's clay accumulation there. The soils are considered, we call it tighter, and those are called B horizon soils. And then the C horizon is that transition to what the soils formed in, the original parent material. Soil composition, let's just look, about half pores, which would be air-filled or water-filled, the other half mineral material. And then there is a small slice of that pie chart that would be organic matter, organisms, roots, humus, etc. What is organic matter? Well, it consists of plant and animal and organism residues and humus. It has very, very positive effects on the soil physical and chemical properties, and it is very important for soil function and soil quality and soil health. So that's a relationship there to take note of. It improves soil structure, water retention, absorption of pollutants, and storage of plant nutrients, increases fertility. So nice view showing your mineral materials, and then the spaces between those are air or water-filled pores. In terms of soil itself and composition, essentially every soil, if you picked up a handful of soil, it'll have a percent sand, silt, and clay. Some soils will have more sand in it. Some soils will have more clay in it. And looking at the particle distribution, the clay-sized particles at the teeny tiny smallest, and then there's silt, and then there's sand. We talk about infiltration. What is that? When it rains out, it's the entry of water into the soil, and sandy soils tend to have rapid infiltration, and clay soils have slower infiltration. But when we looked at compacted soils, we have slower infiltration, more runoff. Perk rate related to this, getting to the hydrologic cycle, once that water infiltrates through the soil surface, it's the rate at which water moves through the soil profile. Soil structure is the shape that soil takes based on its chemical and physical properties. Stay with me, everyone. We're getting through the basics of soils. It'll impact water movement, and but if you have a healthy soil profile, you can have a soil that has a high clay content, because if it has healthy soil structure, water will infiltrate and percolate. But when we heavily compact soils with mass grading, guess what? We lose all of that soil structure. And here, when we talk about soil structure and a healthy soil profile, usually in that A horizon, you'll see granular, deeper in the soil profile, angular, subangular, blocky, what's called soil texture. And when you've got heavily compacted soil, you lose all of that. You have a structureless soil, which oftentimes is just called massive. What is bulk density? So here, throwing out a term for you. It is how tightly packed those soil particles are. So it's a measure of how compacted the soil is, expressed for soil scientists in grams per cubic centimeter. So you can see here's a soil that has a bulk density of 1.2 grams per cubic centimeter. Here's one that has 1.7. So the particles are more tightly packed together. What's soil health? Well, let's look at historic landscapes. So versus new urban landscapes. So historically, let's just think about the southern part of the state, prairie, because the data I have is related to Iowa, which is a prairie state. Those soils had 8 to 10% organic matter and 45% pore space. They were loose, they were granular. The hydrology was what we called infiltration based. Water infiltrated through the soil surface, and percolated through the soil profile, and our streams were fed through groundwater. So the hydrology was groundwater driven. So we had these stable stream flows, clean, we were seeing clean flows to streams, rivers, lakes, wetlands. So once we disturb soils in an urban landscape through mass grading and other activities, we have heavily compacted soils, the organic matter 1 to 3%, 3% if we're really, really lucky. We dramatically reduce the pore space, so the bulk densities increase, soil structure is lost. We have low microorganisms population, and the hydrology has changed. It is now mainly runoff driven. Yes, we still get some groundwater recharge, but on these heavily compacted soils, it's runoff driven. So water is getting to our streams, lakes a lot faster. We have these flashy flows as a result of that. So for those of you that like diagrams, this is showing healthy versus unhealthy soil. So on the left, you're seeing these rootworm channels, you're seeing roots, you're seeing earthworm channels and other microorganisms, versus on the right, you're seeing this is a heavily disturbed soil, very few channels. And these big channels are called macropores, and this is where you get a lot of infiltration occurring at percolation through the soils. But you see not as much microorganism activity, and roots have a more difficult time penetrating through the soils. So what happens? Here's the reality. If you build a new house, what happens to the soil in urban developments? Well, we've got big machinery. We do mass grading. We strip it. Then we stockpile it and we sell it. Although I've had some developers in Iowa tell me, no, we don't sell any of our topsoil. But then we grade it and then we regrade it. We put utilities in, then we regrade it, and then we respread it after the homes are built. And then we might tickle it a little and then cover it with sod. And then we irrigate it and fertilize it and mow it and irrigate it and fertilize it and mow it. And this goes on and on and on. And we have to irrigate. Why? Because the soils are so heavily compacted. And for example, in my neighborhood, which is a 5-year-old neighborhood, there is 0 topsoil. So the sod was laid on these subsurface B horizon soils. So you have to irrigate, you have to fertilize, and guess what? You're generating more runoff that's going down the street into the storm drain and into neighboring streams. So this image was taken down the street from our house in Iowa. And you can see how heavily compacted the soils were. They did just a little, I wouldn't even call it tilling. They pushed the soil around a little bit and added very little topsoil at the time. That policy has changed. On the right, Tom and I did some perk tests in our yard. We wanted to install a rain garden, but this isn't a very good view, but it's the best one. The only topsoil is the topsoil that was in the sod. So you're starting to see the subsurface soils. So what we end up with are these hydrologically what we call dysfunctional soils. So this photo was taken in Iowa after a rainfall event. The soils are so heavily compacted, the water moves under the sod and oozes up over the curb and down the street. And guess what? I saw this in Minnesota as well. So in my neighborhood, I took a 5-year-old neighborhood. I took this image as well. So we end up with these very dysfunctional soils. So Iowa State, I came across this research paper. Wasn't familiar with the researchers, but someone was looking at the dynamic properties of soils on an urban landscape. And interestingly, what they did is they picked a community in Iowa, Ankeny, Iowa, and they went from they sampled soils from yards where the homes were built pre-1939 or so up until 2005. They looked at, I'm going to just focus on organic carbon, which will, the organic matter. And I talked about the benefits of organic matter. And then we will also look at bulk density, another term that I threw out, which is related to how compacted the soils are. And look at the trend here. We can see that, all of a sudden the bulk density increases and organic carbon, in this case, I'll call it organic matter. I converted the values on top here so you can see what those numbers are. wow, they dramatically decrease. So we're seeing in these older homes, we have soil, really, relatively high soil organic matter content. And bulk densities, we see these lower bulk densities. But what the heck happened? What was starting to happen in the 80s and 90s? And I may be running a little bit out of time, but normally I ask people to unmute and try and guess what happened. So you guys just talk to yourselves. But in the 80s, we started doing more mass grading of developments. So making the landscape fit what we want it to be rather than working with the landscape. So we just do a lot more mass grading, a lot more movement of soils and shaping of the soils. And we're seeing the result of that. We're seeing, look at what the soil organic matter content is, very, very low in the newer developments. So we have less organic matter. We have less, as a result of that, the soils you'll have to fertilize more as a result of it. There's less nutrient availability, less water availability, because we're seeing we have more compacted soils as well. So on and on goes this cycle of having to fertilize, having to irrigate to have that green lush lawn. And that's a whole nother topic that I could talk about as alternatives. But so interestingly enough, I do in the training I've done for construction site erosion and sediment control, I pop in a section on Soils 101, whether people wanted to hear about it or not. And I get into a little on soil quality restoration. And I had an engineer from a development company say, because I was like, yeah, here's the reality of development, and we can do a better job. He's like, hey, I'm going to see if I can get you some funding to do some research on decompaction of urban soils and come up with, okay, let's look at what realistically would work, what would be easy for developers, builders. So Southgate Development provided us with funding. This is not tons of funding. We partnered with Iowa State University. And also one of the faculty involved, he left Iowa State and was working for RDG. It was a 1.5-year study. We're looking at the impact of looking at 5 soil restoration practices on urban soil. So, and 4 of those 5 included combinations of decompaction and addition of an organic amendment. And then looking at, we were trying to test some of the methods that are in the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual. And then looking at residential land development, there is that initial mass grading phase, your first mobilization, and then utilities are installed, street improvements, foundations and footings, then there'll be some fine grading, finally flat work and landscaping. So, and we're going to focus on this first mobilization and the third mobilization where you have final grading in that residential lot. So, what we are initially looking at is after mass grading, and usually in some developments, the landscape will sit for a number of years until lots are sold or whatever. What can we do to try and improve soil performance and then maybe like increase the quality, the soil health? So we experimented with using tillage radishes, and I know that you guys use them in Minnesota, MnDOT as well. So we experimented with that as trying to improve the topsoil, surface soil quality for when we're going to be doing that final soil stabilization, that last mobilization after homes are built. So here, these are the trials. I don't expect you to read this, but this PowerPoint will be available. So the control was business as usual, which is return the top, so grade the soil. So we have compacted subsoils and then returning 4 inches of topsoil. And then there was a method where we decompacted the subsoil, added 4 inches of loosened topsoil. And the third one was we decompacted, and then we returned that soil that had the green manure or the tillage radish and amended loosened topsoil. And then the fourth one was we decompacted the soil and we mixed in compost with the topsoil. The last one, decompacted subsoil. And then we added compost and loosened topsoil and kind of mixed that in with the subsoil. So here are the photos showing that, and I have a short video that shows the equipment that was used. And we were trying to find, readily, the developer had readily available equipment. They purchased this head. I'm just going to show you For those of you that have not seen decompaction, this is mounted on a skid loader. I'll just run this for a short while. There you go, and it's that easy. Okay, lab analyses, we did bulk density, pore space, infiltration rates. We looked at microbial biomass, the biological activity. We buried green and red rooibos tea bags. So this is a new test to me. You can check on biological activity. We were working with Marshall McDaniel at Iowa State, looked at nutrients, organic matter, and the results. We found out that the decompaction increased infiltration rates by over 2,000% and time to runoff 463% on average. That's pretty amazing. And so this definitely, when looking at the performance of these practices that are in the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual, we've got some evidence now that they're effective. So if you want to see the data itself, so here's water infiltration rate, our control, and I don't have time to get into a lot of details on that, but you can see the difference that occurred. This is the subsurface ripping and compost amendment, which had the highest, the best results, I should say. So when looking at bulk density, and I think this may have a lot to do with the person that was conducting it, we didn't see a lot of evidence indicating a reduction in bulk density, but I think, like I said, it had to do with the nature of collecting samples. But the tillage radish part of it for biological decompaction did not have a strong effect on infiltration in this study, and the decompaction treatments didn't affect soil chemical and biological. Oop, somebody needs to mute themselves. So we're seeing the influence of this. Probably some of the characteristics you can see here is your surface soil bulk densities were different. These are your subsurface soils that were sampled along with pore space. So what were the effects of compost and tillage on soil health? The compost inputs may have longer term effects on improving nutrients and water holding capacity, and that falls in line with other studies. And the compost obviously had stronger effect. But soil organic matter, I'll focus in on that. We can see that in the surface soils, the soil organic matter content of those soils that were amended with compost, and actually the tillage radish as well, had higher organic matter content than the others. Subsurface soils, you're not really seeing an improvement there with the addition of compost on the subsurface soils. You'd have to rip different. Okay, so but on average, compost increases soil organic matter by 43% when you're doing the analyses in those surface soils, top 6 inches. Phosphorus increased as well as potassium, but these nutrients, macronutrients, persisted to a depth of 6 to 12 inches, which is interesting. While the compost tended to increase the soil microbial biomass, in looking at the decomposition, we were seeing the compost increased. This is the soil extractable. Oh shoot, I'm already for organic carbon increased that, which is an indication that the biological enhancements, the compost, really increase soil microbial biomass. So sorry, the soil, I was messing up because this is not my specialty, this part of it, the soil extractable organic carbon and the salt extractable organic nitrogen, looking at those values for soil health and microorganism enhancements. Then there was a study that was, and I sort of forgot about this, but this is a question that was asked by, and I forget who actually asked it early on, but how long does soil compost last in the landscape? And so we did this study quite a while ago with the National Lab of Ag and Environment in Ames, Iowa, USDA. And we were looking at a number of different things where we had, I wanted to see the benefits of prairie grass as turf versus lawn. grasses, and using compost amendments, using topsoil. And then I also wanted to compare, and I'm flying through this, I know I am, but you'll have access to this information. I also wanted to see through a different experiment what the impact would be, differences would be on urban soils if you amended with compost and aerated versus if you rototilled in the compost and the topsoil versus if you just did a compost blanket over the soils. And so essentially the results, there are a lot of different results, but focusing on you had an increased time of runoff. And in fact, on one of these where they tilled in the compost, there's a note here that for one of their infiltration runs, it was over 2 point something or other hours before they got any runoff. So that's pretty amazing. And the infiltration rates as well increased. But what I wanted to focus on in terms of how long does this last? So what they did is they look at soil characteristics from, on some of them, from 4 to 8 years. So this is the topsoil rototill compost, initially done in 2008. So in 2015, they saw evidence that the applied depth 10 centimeters. At 6 centimeters, they were still seeing evidence of visual evidence of compost amendments. And then the top soil compost aeration, that was done in 2011. They were still seeing evidence in 2015, as well as the compost rototill in 2015. So that's a little bit of information I got on how long does it last. Then getting into soil quality management and restoration. And just wanted to introduce you to so Iowa has an Iowa Stormwater Management Manual. There is a section on soil management and restoration. So essentially, we suggest that there be a soil management plan, it's not required, where you look at, okay, what soils are going to be disturbed, which soils are not going to be disturbed, let's protect the undisturbed soils. What are you going to do on the disturbed soils? What's going to be stripped, stockpiled? Where are you going to place the stockpiles? Are you going to be amending the soil? Are you going to be ripping or tilling the subsurface soils and this type of information? And are you going to be using any soil quality restoration methods? One thing that's sort of interesting that I'll inject here, you may not be aware of it, but effective July 1, there was some pushback from some of the developers. Some of the cities, because you're impacted by construction site erosion and sediment control, the Federal Register that says, unless unfeasible, preserve topsoil. Well, people can interpret that many, many different ways. So some cities had a 4-inch topsoil requirement, some 6, some 8-inch topsoil requirements. So it varied across the state. Well, the developers were having some issues with that. So they were able to get some legislation that passed through that counties and cities in Iowa can no longer develop standards or cannot have topsoil depth requirements, but they can develop standards to evaluate topsoils. So we put together a topsoil management plan that, okay, so find out how much topsoil's on the site, calculate an average depths, stockpile it, then return the topsoil at the calculated depth, and then verify that it matches. There are different methods for soil quality restoration. So there are the 2 management, let's say these not disturb the soils, but then if you are disturbing the soils, we have 5 different methods that can be used. We're trying to get 8 inches of a healthy soil profile through a combination of topsoil and or decompaction and or compost amendments or other amendments. And then this last one is on existing lawns, what can be done. So we're looking at a water quality, being able to manage the water quality volume, starting off with what is a healthy soil. And there are all these different methods, but one thing I wanted to get through is on existing lawns, what can be done. So there are a number of cities in Iowa that have cost share programs, which I'll get into. So, but on existing lawns, aerate, and we're looking at going beyond the plug aerator. There are deep plug or deep tine aerators that can be used. Then you top dress with a thin layer of compost and then seed over the top of that. I have to hop through this stuff, but actually, this is really important that I touch on. in looking at, this is in the Iowa Stormwater Management Manual section, there is the ability, if you do soil quality restoration, that you can manage what's called a water quality volume or part of a water quality volume. Which is important. But also when it comes to engineers and designing basins for stormwater post-construction stormwater management, you're working with curve numbers in those designs. So you can, if you had poor soils, no soil quality restoration versus good, you can be using, working with different curve numbers, and you can potentially downsize basins if soil quality restoration is done. So how is this done in new developments? You've got spaders, rippers, tilling equipment. On existing lawns, a lot of different aerators. I'm going to skip the video there. Compost spreaders are available. You can go to the manure spreader, pneumatically blown. So here's just going through an existing project in Des Moines Metro. The before had a pretty dysfunctional soils. They aerated, top dressed. That's what the top dressing looks like. And 1 year later, neighbors are saying, hey, what'd you do to your lawn? In Des Moines Metro projects, Polk City, they received funding from the Iowa Department of Ag, a 50% cost share. They did 92, well, in 21, 63 properties, SQR, 23, 92 properties. Clive did what's called a batch and build, where they went out and got a contractor to do a number. There's a bid process, got a number, not just doing one or two here or there, but doing a whole number within the community. 22, they did 114 properties, 24, 80, and then a little bit of information on that. And then just overall, we have this program called the Rain Campaign in Iowa, and it was just promoting all practices, rain gardens and such, but just focusing on SQR projects. This started in 2018 with 35 soil quality restorations. In 2024 in the metro area, 394 for a total of 958 SQR projects. So here's more information on the Des Moines Metro batch and build and Johnston. There is a manual if anyone is interested. They're using the same process for oxbow restorations and bioreactors and other practices, batch and build type process. On our website on iowastormwater.org, there is a list of all the cities in the metro area that have cost share programs, and then as well as the rest of the state lists those as well. Out of the Rain Campaign, you can see the different practices so far. Soil quality actually that number is higher. It's 900 and some soil quality restoration. So it's one of the more popular practices because it's easy. It's easy to do, for example, compared to rain gardens. Then one little side note, Tom and I, new to Minnesota, we decided to start small consulting, route-wise environmental. So we're just getting kicked off. No, we don't have a website yet, but providing technical support on stormwater management, urban side of it for me. And then I'm going to hand it over to Tom to talk about forest soil health. I know that I talked very quickly.
All right, here we go. Can you see my slides? And can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
and yes.
and yes. Very good. Okay, I'm going to give a brief discussion of the Forestland Infield Soil Health Assessment, which is a new tool developed by the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And the idea here is that we want to look at private non-industrial forest lands primarily from a soil health perspective, but also considering all the other ecosystem services that forests provide. including the benefits for water quality and the idea that many forest watersheds are used for drinking water sources. In fact, about 3/4 of Minnesota's drinking water, either surface or aquifers, is from forested watersheds. This is good work done by people in the state of Minnesota. Nationally, 150 million people get their drinking water from forested watersheds. And that filtering effect that Pat's talked about, that's all has to do with the quality of the soil health. And in this case, we're talking about the soil health in those forested watersheds. Some of the interesting work in this area also relates to how urbanization or loss of forest cover due to development may have an impact on drinking water supplies. And the darker the green, the greater the change in development or loss of forest cover in the state of Minnesota. This is probably familiar work to you, at least to some of you. Nationally, you would think that most forest land is owned by the federal government. We often think of the national forest, but in fact, private family forests is the largest share of the pie of forest ownership in the United States. 9.6 million families, individuals, trusts, and estates. In the state of Minnesota, it's a little bit different because there's a large segment of state forests, but still 33% of the forest is in private ownership, and that represents 5.4 million acres. And these are small parcels. And if you look in the lower right, it says the top 5 reasons for owning are beauty or scenery, wildlife habitat, and nature protection. So private individuals who own forests in Minnesota own them for the natural beauty and the environmental benefits of forest cover. Those are the people that are being targeted by the FIFSHA. So real briefly, the goal of the FIFSHA is to identify soil health resource concerns on private non-industrial forest land agroecosystems. The 4 soil health resource concerns are listed there. And it's important because in order for an NRCS planner or technical service provider to help an individual with their forest soil health, they have to identify a problem before they can apply a conservation practice. And so these are the 4 practices that are identified by planners in the field. The 8 indicators to help identify whether any of those resource concerns are present are listed there on the left, and I'll go through real briefly the 8 indicators. The FIFSHA itself is in spreadsheet form. And so a planner that wants to go in the field has to do a little bit of work ahead of time where they identify their client and the location and some of the characteristics of the site. There's a brief review of the instructions there. And the scoring is done on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 having no resource concern, 2 to 3 as some concern, and 1 or 2 meaning that there's very likely a concern for one of those 4 soil health indicators. Just an example of how this might work. If a planner was going out into a 40-acre site, they might look at the soil map. The outline in orange there is 3 different soil series. This is taken from a site in the Ozarks. 4 transects were set up to capture the variation of the site characteristics, and it worked out that if they did 16 sites, there'd be 1 assessment for every 2.5 acres. And an assessment would be done in 1/20th of an acre, which is a standard forest inventory size. So the planner would go to those points and assess the soil health in that 1/20th of an acre plot. And that would be representative of a 2.5 acre part of the whole parcel. I'm going to go through this really quickly, but there are those 8 indicators. These are the first 4. You can see the format, the green, score of 5, no concern. Intermediate in gray, score of 4 or 3 is the potential, and then a likely concern, a 1 or 2. Each indicator has a descriptor for those different scores. The RC is the resource concern. So that indicator is identifying different resource concerns. So you'll see the first one, soil cover, identifies all 4 resource concerns. The score is in that second to last column, and then there's a place to enter field observation notes. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these indicators in great detail, but many of the same concerns that you might have in cropland, for instance, apply here, like residue cover in cropland. Soil cover in forest is also important. Woody debris is important because it's a longer term source of carbon for this and for the recycling of nutrients and carbon in the ecosystem. It's a little bit more of a Goldilocks indicator because too much coarse woody debris on the soil surface becomes a fire hazard. So there can be too much debris, and that can be especially true if you have disease or insect outbreaks and or weather events, windstorms with blowdown of trees, for instance. And this can lead to concerns about soil burn severity. In the news lately in Minnesota, northeast Minnesota, this indicator also wants to acknowledge that there is good fire. So we have prescribed fire as a practice in NRCS. So it's intended to be a low severity fire, not a severe wildfire. So reducing that coarse woody debris, reducing fuel loads can prevent the situation that's shown in the photo on the right, where essentially the soil has been incinerated, and if it's hot enough, it can actually even fuse the clays in the soil. Soil disturbance intensity indicator. We'd like to think that this photo on the right doesn't happen anymore, but it was in the last couple of years where the ruts were so deep during the harvest operation. They weren't any deeper only because the equipment was bottoming out. It'll take years to decades for that soil to recover from that kind of disturbance. Those 4 indicators are done visually from the surface, and the next 4 indicators are done by excavating a small shovelful of soil. We do 1 to 3 of these excavations at each assessment location. The idea is that we'd love to dig soil pits, but in the interest of time and resources, it's more realistic to take a shovel in the field and do a few excavations at each assessment point. We look at soil structure, which Pat has discovered or has covered. We'd like to see the granular or subangular blocky structure at the surface. When we start to see more compaction, we see that platy, beginning of platy structure shown on the right, which indicates that we're having some loss of soil structure that is not beneficial to plant or soil biota. Often considered the most important indicator is the water stable aggregates indicator. So the structural aggregates that we see, if they're submerged in water and remain stable, that indicates a healthy soil that's likely to be more resilient to factors, disturbance in the field. If it's not well held together, like the photo on the left, and it just disintegrates in water, that means that it's much more likely to degrade and to be lost in erosion. The soil fauna biological diversity indicator. This can be very specific to a forest type or location, but basically we're looking for beneficial insects in the soil or evidence of those insects like midden piles or burrows. These invertebrates are critical for recycling the down branches, the forest litter, incorporating that into the soil and eventually helping to build that soil organic matter that's so important for soil health. And the last indicator is the roots indicator. Obviously very important for forest productivity that you have no restrictive layers, the rooting is not limited by chemical or physical soil properties. And root exudates, the materials that sort of are released by the roots into the soil. Very important for a healthy soil microorganisms. Those exudates are an important source of nutrients and carbon for the growth of organisms in the rhizosphere, that zone around the roots. So what happens is the planner goes through and assigns a score to each of those indicators, and those are summed up in the spreadsheet. Threshold values are listed there for the 4 resource concerns, and the spreadsheet then tells you based on the score whether or not you have a potential or likely resource concern. Then a discussion can take place between the planner and the landowner or the operator about what potential conservation practices might be applied to address those individual resource concerns. So just to summarize here, and by the way, this is a brand new tool. It was just released in the last couple of weeks. So the goal of the FIFSHA is to identify soil health resource concerns, focusing on private, non-industrial forest land agroecosystems. However, that's the NRCS's goal. The tool is available to anyone. So if people wanted to apply it, for instance, state agency personnel on state land or federal forest from the Forest Service, they're welcome to use the tool as well. It is designed to be broadly applicable and readily adaptable to local conditions and practices. We acknowledge that, there's a great diversity in forest ecosystems, and the local practices that might affect, for instance, the choice of conservation practices that might be applied. We use those 8 indicators to identify the 4 soil health resource concerns. There was a lot of testing and evaluation in the field that went into winnowing down the indicators. And lastly, that we give those numerical rankings. And one of the benefits of the numerical rankings is that not only can you identify whether resource concerns exist, but if you go back to sites over time, then you can have a numerical score to know whether your site is improving or degrading in terms of its soil health. And lastly, I think we have some time for questions. By the way, there is a large document, a technical note that supports the FIFSHA, and I'd be happy to share my email address, and I can send that document to the organizers of the webinar if there's interested in having that distributed. So thank you for your attention, and hopefully have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom and Pat. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So Jared asked, are you going to be looking at infiltration rates over time for each treatment? And I believe that was during Pat's portion.
Yeah, I was assuming. We would have liked to. However, the developer let us use that land for 1.5 years, and guess what happened after that? It was developed. So it would be nice to have a study that looked a little bit more long-term at this. So yeah.
Okay, and then Michael asked, what is the approximate cost per lot for the compost amendment?
I knew that was going to be asked. So there was a little bit of information in there. I asked some people in the Des Moines metro area. And so last year for one of the projects, and it depended on how many projects, the price went down with the number of projects. It was 11 cents to 25 cents per square foot. So, maybe like an average size lot, maybe $2,000 to $3,000, but then all of that was cost shared. So 50% of that was cost shared. So it would, the resident was probably paying $1,000, $1,500.
Okay, Joanne asked, Pat, what source of compost is used for SQR?
It is, when you say source, it would be, I'm assuming you're referring to yard, if it's yard waste source versus the actual, where it's coming from. It's Metro Waste in the Des Moines metro area, but yeah, it would be yard waste type compost, not industrial or wastewater derived compost for the Des Moines metro area. in Davenport is a little bit different because I think that they may mix in some composted sludge, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Suzanne asks, what kind of training is needed for conservation district staff to be able to apply the, oh, that is a cruel acronym, FIFSHA. Will NRCS be providing any training?
That's a fair question. We had training planned for the year that's all been canceled. So it's uncertain about when training will be happening, although I'd be willing to provide, greater detail presentation of the FIFSHA if there are interested groups. I can do that. Whether probably cannot do any travel or field training of that, at least not through this fiscal year. But I think it would be very helpful. It's a lot to absorb without actually being out in the field and doing it. Hopefully there'll be opportunities in the future.
All right, we don't have any other questions in the chat right now. If there's anyone in the audience who wants to unmute and ask a question, please feel free to do so or pop something in the chat. We can give folks a minute here. Usually once I start to wrap up, we get 3 more questions, so.
Yeah, and we left both of our emails if anyone would like to contact us. As you can tell, we're pretty passionate about the soil health part of it. So we're available as a resource.
See, there we go. Okay. Fox asked, has NRCS communicated with any other federal agencies on ways they could incorporate this? For example, looking at soil during fire effects, monitoring by NPS folks. I know they're not the intended users of this tool, but they could be unintended users.
Yes, there are a lot of changes going on in the federal government right now, so it's really hard for us to know, but we're putting together a soil health handbook, and part of that handbook is doing exactly that, reaching out to other partners to build some of those collaborations and get some more feedback into soil health in different land use, because the focus had previously been on cropland. There's also range and pasture and included with forest land in the handbook. So we're trying to build more connections and more partners. It's been interrupted a little bit right now, but hopefully in the future we'll be doing exactly what's being suggested there, is applying this tool in beyond the private and non-industrial forest lands. That would be the hope.
All right, Paula, I see you have your hand up. If you want to go ahead and ask your question. You are muted still.
Sorry, this question is for Pat. So I'm thinking about the soil, topsoil assessment standard that you developed when the cities in Iowa were no longer able to have a topsoil minimum depth requirement. And I know from working on like plan reviews and designs, sometimes, we don't really have a credit per se here in Minnesota for a soil amendment, but depending on jurisdiction, designers can bring that to the table, and maybe a local jurisdiction will allow a lower curve number for a soil amendment, that sort of thing. So what I'm wondering though is that you can put that in a plan, but it doesn't necessarily get implemented properly. And you can ask for construction observations maybe, but do you feel like there could be a pre-post test maybe could be a way to approve that credit?
And there are some cities, although I because of that legislation, I'm not sure where things are at like exactly at this moment, but there are some cities that go out and field verify, and they'll use a penetrometer to, I think this is, for example, the city of Clive will use a penetrometer as well. But one other note, Paula, to keep in mind is there was like a big educational campaign to kind of get to this point. And it was everything from contractors, especially on the residential lot part of it. There was a lot of education and training that went into doing that. But yeah, there can be simple tests. I mean, the simple ribbon test I've taught to some city staff, as well as using a penetrometer as well. Some cities have done, that's the field verification part of it. Yeah, some cities have chosen the affidavit route that, you know, you're signing indicating that, yeah, we decompacted and we amended with compost kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Really good talk.
Thanks.
All right.
So you guys
go ahead,
didn't
Pat.
know that you were going to be getting all the soils. You got a soils 101 and you got urban soils and forest soils.
Yeah, this is different for us at Water Issues. All right. Real quick, Luis asked, what are some things you recommend people can do in their own backyard to improve soil health?
Oh, you know what I would do? Okay, I would tell you, here's an experiment of what you shouldn't do. Number one, you know, those feet that you can put them on your feet and you can go around your yard and aerate your lawn. Doesn't work. You get stuck in the soil and you can't move. So, but I would suggest renting an aerator and applying a thin layer of compost and reseeding. You can do that. I already talked to Dakota County. I'm like, can't you include cost share on this? So, but there needs to be this educational campaign to kind of bring everyone up to this. But aerate, top dress with compost, or even topsoil, but only a thin layer. Otherwise, you're going to kill your turf. And this is something that you do in the spring and the fall, not in the summer, or you will kill your grass because of the, is it albedo, Tom, the dark color of the compost. And then if you don't get any rain, you have to irrigate or yeah. So.
Okay. Thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time and wrap this up for today. There was a question, will you be able to share slides? Anthony, the presentation will be available on our YouTube channel, and if I believe you guys said you would be willing to share slides, if you want to drop your email in the chat or otherwise connect. Anthony, if you would like to put your email in the chat, then you guys can connect afterwards. But thank you, Pat and Tom, for your extremely interesting talk today on soil health and urban environment. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to us.
Happy to
Thank
present.
you.
Everyone have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Bye now.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.